Hello folks, so today we are going to talk about the S1 Mark II. It has been a long time I haven't talked about it. I was supposed to put a video out there, but I didn't do it because there is a lot going on right now. I actually have to go pick up my license plate because we lost it. I have spent 1 minute talking about things that are not even relevant to the S1 Mark II, but let's get into that. And before that, I'm just gonna go get my license plate and come back. So hello folks, how are you doing? I decided at the end to just come home because it's the most relaxing place for me. It's my sanctuary, and actually currently I'm in my garden, which we are still building. This is the new garden, the new house and the new garden that we are still working on. But in any case, let's go straight into the video. As I was doing in my older video or the previous video where I was talking about the S1E, the S1II, I have to applaud again Lumix, because I think Lumix is kind of the most evolutionary company out there when it comes to like software development of cameras, because of how much they freaking squeeze out of like these Sony sensors, like things that even Sony themselves don't even maybe even imagine that they can actually squeeze out of their sensors, or they don't want to, which is probably. But in any case, it's slightly windy, so I don't have the wind muff on this, so if you hear some or whatever, that's the reason why. But I love this camera. Like, I've been looking and watching at so many reviews on this camera, and I'm more and more convinced that this is actually the perfect camera for me. It's like nearly my dream camera, except for one thing that is missing that we will talk about a little bit forward into the video. But what are the things that makes me really love this camera? Here I have a list because obviously I will not remember everything. And I love the fact that it has the same sensor as the Z6 Mark III. And when that camera came out, we saw how much love that camera got because of the readout speeds and what it actually delivered for the price point, because it's still the king at that price point. For 2,500, between 2,500 and 2,800 euros, you can freaking get such an amazing semi-stacked sensor. Gets 4K 120, which is a little bit different between the Nikon and the Lumix, because with the Lumix you can get 4K 120 with a 1.1 times crop, while with Nikon you have basically an APS-C crop, which is 1.5 or Super 35, however you want to call it, but it has a 1.5 crop. And one of the things that always is the issue when you have a fast sensor is that you have to give up on dynamic range. Obviously you can work around that and stuff like that, but of course by working around it, that means engineers have to do way more work, and that means you got to pay way more for the camera. And I think that's what happened probably with the Nikon Z6 Mark III, where they probably didn't want to maybe invest too much on the dynamic range, but deliver the faster sensor they can for the price point by giving up a little bit on dynamic range. But it actually even like a normal thing usually, that the faster the sensor, the more dynamic range you actually give up to, if there isn't really, you know, so much work behind it. And that's what I feel like Lumix actually did, because you can get 1 to 2 stops better than the Nikon Z6, okay, of dynamic range. And that's huge, because with the Nikon, I remember while Jerome Dan was doing the dynamic range test, it was around 11.5 and something like that. But then with this one you can get basically 12.5, basically between 12.3 and 12.5 in the normal dynamic range mode. So not the boost, because this camera comes with the boost, which is amazing. We will talk about it in a minute. So with the normal dynamic range, so you can basically have two stops of ISO, which is 640 and 5000. So you actually even get kind of a half stop better than actually the previous sensors, which is the one that the S1II has. And it's actually quite impressive, because I always thought that stack sensor or semi-stack sensor in any way, which this is the second time that a company uses this sensor, but a sensor that is always faster always gave up dynamic range. As an example, the A9 III from Sony with the global shutter, they have to give up dynamic range to be able to work on that. But then if you go on the cinema line, that is a different story, but those are red and you have to pay way more. There is way more work behind those sensors, and of course it comes with a price. So that's where, for this amount of money, I feel like it's pretty right for like whatever this camera is kind of delivering. I know that people have been talking about it being maybe too expensive, but we will talk in another video about this. So consider subscribing and let's have a chat when that video comes out. But in any case, this camera has basically the boost mode. So the dynamic range boost mode is something that we have seen already in the GH7, right? Because it's pretty different from what we've seen in the S1R Mark II, which is a different type of dynamic range boost. This one basically just tops up to 1000, and the rolling shutter, it's lower. So you basically go back to the 24 megapixel older sensor rolling shutter when you have this dynamic range boost on. But this is more for like this type of talking head, if you are like filming maybe a film where you have a static shot, when you don't need to pan like crazy. It's pretty good. And 1000 ISO is pretty high, so you might probably just go with a stacking of ND filters in front of your sensor. So of course I've seen many tests that in low light it's actually pretty good. It's pretty good, especially with the color recognition that it has and with the information that it kind of can do. So I'm pretty impressed with what they managed to deliver inside this camera. The fact that it can do open gate up to 6K 20 frames per second for who is in Europe, and for who is in US up to 30 frames per second, it's impressive. But what is more impressive is that they can do 5.1K up to 60 frames per second open gate oversampled. So that is quite insane and mind-blowing, and it doesn't come at the cost of rolling shutter either. It's actually super neat and super good. And then you get 4K up to 120 frames per second for who is in US, and 100 frames per second for who is in Europe or the rest of the world, with 1.1 times crop. And what is the beauty of this 120 frames per second or 100 frames per second is that it's not line skipped as it is in the S1R Mark II, right? This is purely a crop on the sensor to kind of fight the fact that the sensor is not fully stacked, so they cannot really deliver a full frame basically 4K 120 or 100. And basically the FX3, the FX6, the legendary A7S III, they all have a 1.1 times crop when you shoot in 4K 120. So there is nothing nobody can rage about it. And in one video that I actually saw, it's pretty sharp. It's way better than the S1R Mark II, because it's not line skipped, and it's basically shooting it through 4K, not oversampled, which we don't really need a 4K 120 oversampled. It's pretty good just how it is. And it can shoot up to 240 frames per second in full HD. I think you have to give up for I think the subject detect, for what I've seen and for what people have said. Lumix has this weird thing that when you go upper frame rate in settle mode, especially in 1080p, they give up something in the autofocus system. I still don't understand that logic, because that's the same thing that we have in the S5IIX, the S5II, and the S5, where you give up always something when you go to the 180 frames per second or the 100 frames per second in 1080p, but whatever, doesn't matter. But what I've heard, what people have said, I haven't seen many videos on this, unfortunately, but it seems that this 240 frames per second is totally usable. Like, it's not like completely bad as we have seen in the previous models, slow motions. This is actually really usable according to these people, so I'm waiting to see really a lot of videos on this. Many have promised that they're going to deliver it. I've talked to a YouTuber too. He said he's going to do a video about it, so let's wait and see what they are going to say about it. Then we are going to have 4K 60 full frame and oversampled, so that is something that we were waiting for the longest time in the full frame part of Lumix, and they finally deliver it. Beautiful, amazing, and that's not only the beautiful thing that this camera is going to have. You can basically shoot in cinema scope, so basically with the bar 2.4, basically at 6K or 5K, and then in 4K too, if I'm not mistaken, up to 60 frames per second. So if you have that choice, you have it there, and it's pretty beautiful and pretty amazing. And you can still shoot basically the 5K and 6K up to 60 frames per second, if I'm not mistaken, which with the Nikon Z6 Mark III, you can have it only if you basically shoot in the NRAW. If not, you are top to 30 frames per second or 25 frames per second. So I still think that the Lumix has a head on that part. Then it has ProRes recording internally, as we have seen with the previous models, but with the difference that you can shoot ProRes RAW internally as the S1R Mark II. And the beautiful thing about this is that you can even do that in the S1 Mark II-E, so the cheaper brother, which is basically I think the follow-up to the S5 Mark II-X. So it's pretty insane that they are doing that. And here is basically the thing that I didn't really love, the fact that they still haven't managed to find an agreement with Blackmagic to deliver B-RAW internally. I know there is a licensing that you have to pay, but I'm willing to pay that. Like, I mean, if you give me the choice, hey, pay this amount if you want to have this, I will do that. But they give it to us basically externally through HDMI, and then there is a firmware update coming later on for the S1R Mark II. Where you can have basically the 8.1K and 7.2K B-RAW out from the HDMI. So that is amazing for whoever have this high resolution version of basically this Lumix lineup of cameras. Then basically, what else do we have here? We have both 32-bit float. We have 8-stop of IBIS, which is the newest and improved IBIS that Lumix has delivered, which is called basically Dual IS2, which basically will work especially in combination with lenses that are image stabilized. So imagine Lumix already being a beast. Then you put in front of them a lens that basically will match and this dual IS thing that they have. It will basically be a gimbal on your hands. Obviously it would never so close to the gimbal, but it's going to be pretty close to it, and this is quite exciting. Then for our lovely photographers, because I'm a videographer first and then a photographer, you get 70 frames per second raw. Okay, rewind. 70 frames per second raw, with a little catch though, because it seems that the buffer doesn't change if you have the SSD, or you have the SSD, or you have the CF-S5II card inside. The buffer is still the same. It's a bit slow, so that's what many have reported. So I hope they will kind of deliver like Nikon does, like different buffer rates where maybe you can do 30 frames per second, 40 frames per second, and slowly like do less and less. You choose there. So maybe we'll improve the buffer, and maybe kind of improve the buffer when it comes to the CF-S5II card, because it doesn't make sense that using a faster readout card still doesn't improve a buffer, you know, readout. So let's see what Lumix will decide to do. Lumix is really good firmware wise, as we have seen many times. And yeah, so SSD recording, CF-S5II card, SSD card, all in one camera. And one thing that I love the most is that you can basically do a backup straight to an SSD, or vice versa, if you need it. So imagine you have finished a shoot and you just want to back up all the files. You are in the car, you don't want to take your computer with you, because the M1 Maxes are super heavy, so you don't always want to bring them with you. So this is an amazing good way to actually just offload the file straight to SSD while you just commonly leaving the space where you were working to home. And yeah, that's pretty much everything that excites me the most about this camera in particular, and that's why this camera is going to be my next camera. Obviously there is going to be many other cameras coming out in the next months, like probably the Canon R6 Mark III, most probably the Sony A7 IV, and well, and yada yada. Then we will see. But the S1 Mark II is basically the perfect camera for me and for my use, especially next year, where I'm going to have a feature and a documentary and my own personal project coming on. And for what I've been speaking about this project, it seems like the S1 Mark II might be a better fit than the S5 Mark II X for me. But what are your thoughts? Share them down below. Let's have a chat. I would love to hear more from you and what your thoughts are on what I just shared. Remember that these are my thoughts. They don't need to be your thoughts. But I will still love to hear what you will like to see that they bring into this lineup of camera. Like, what is your dream camera? Like, what would you like to see different from this camera? What would you like to see more added to this camera? Yeah, so thank you for sticking here and listening to me blubbering. I'm gonna see you in the next one. Yeah, take good care of yourself.